On the 12th of March 1840, Paul Edmund Strzelecki was the first European to scientifically identify, climb and name Australia's highest landform, Mount Kosciuszko. More a mound than a mountain, at least in the traditional European sense, he named this significant geographical feature after a famous Polish patriot, Tadeusz Kościuszko. The event revealed the grit, determination, physical strength, leadership skills and scientific expertise of the man. The circumstances which brought Strzelecki, a Polish-born traveller, explorer, scientist and diplomat, to this British penal colony are intriguing, as are the details of his life and the notable events therein, of which there are many. Strzelecki is in many ways an enigma, a man of mystery, due in no small part to the terms of a will that decreed all his personal papers be destroyed. At the same time, he is a man of great historical importance and achievement, based on the records of his life that have survived, both from his hand, but also from those who encountered him. Perhaps of most lasting significance is the fact that in 1845 he published in London the first substantial scientific text describing southeastern Australia. It was titled Physical Description of New South Wales and Van Diemen's Land. Within its 462 pages and associated plates are succinctly described, discussed and presented descriptions of people, places and events. He brings together previous research from a variety of sources and presents it alongside his own discoveries and analyses, laying a solid foundation for those scientists that followed in his footsteps. In addition to his pioneering endeavours in Australia, between 1846 and 1848, Strzelecki worked as the British emissary to Ireland, coordinating the relief effort for the then catastrophic famine sweeping the country. It is stated that, all told, his intervention stopped more than 200,000 children from starving and extended into the broader community. For this, and other work such as his Australian researches and discoveries, he was knighted by Queen Victoria and given accolades by organisations such as the Royal Geographical Society. The former added the title Sir to his name, though whilst in Australia he was also known as Count or Baron Strzelecki, reflecting some of his early work as a diplomat in Europe. Of special interest is Strzelecki's extended residence in Australia between the 25th of April 1839 and the 22nd of April 1843, following on an extended period of travelling in the Americas, Asia and the Pacific. During that period in Australia, he notably walked over 7,000 miles, as this was the form of travel he preferred, rather than by horse or buggy. It was often by necessity, as his scientific explorations took him to locations where there were no roads, or merely paths used for thousands of years by the local Aboriginal people. Strzelecki was a big, strong man with an active interest in geology, geography and the physical environment around him. Walking enabled him to keep close to the ground as he carried out his detailed observations, collections of specimens and related investigations, all of which were recorded and eventually written up and published in numerous articles and his 1845 book. Strzelecki was also a bon vivant, socially adept and able to engage with all manner of people whilst in the colony, from governors to convicts, free settlers young and old, and the local Aboriginal people and fellow scientists and travellers. His diplomatic skills were formidable and held him in good stead with all levels of local society, including politicians and the military. This was especially important in New South Wales and Van Diemen's Land, as they strove to throw off the shackles of penal conditions and develop open, free, democratic societies. During those 4 years in Australia, Strzelecki diligently collected fossils and rock and mineral specimens, described local flora and fauna, recorded temperatures and weather conditions, and provided a detailed description of elements of the culture and traditions of the Australian Aborigines, at a time when such studies were being largely neglected, and at an especially critical time for the Tasmanian Aboriginal people. Strzelecki also produced some of the first detailed geological maps of southeastern Australia and Tasmania. His travels through New South Wales, to the Hunter region, the Illawarra, the Southern Highlands and south to the Alps and on to Victoria, were recorded in detail by him and by some of his colleagues, as was his 2-year residence in Tasmania, then known as Van Diemen's Land, as the guest of the Lieutenant Governor and fellow explorer Sir John Franklin and his wife Lady Jane Franklin. Strzelecki may be most famous for his naming of Mount Kosciuszko and role in opening up the Gippsland region of Victoria to further European settlement. However, to students of the history of Australian science, Strzelecki's exploits cover a much broader field. His legacy, for example, is evident in the following: Strzelecki, a town in Victoria; Strzelecki National Park in Tasmania; Mount Strzelecki, a peak on Flinders Island in the Furneaux Islands off Tasmania; Strzelecki Desert in South Australia; the Strzelecki Track, once again in South Australia; and Strzelecki Creek, for example, once again in South Australia and named after him by the explorer Charles Sturt in 1845; Eucalyptus strzelecki, a Gippsland tree; numerous plaques proclaiming his achievements, and a statue by Lake Jindabyne. In summary, as a pioneering scientist, explorer and humanitarian, Paul Edmund Strzelecki can rightly stand alongside Tadeusz Kościuszko, both within his homeland and most especially within Australia, as a pole of distinction.